My brothers and sisters, we've got to stay united. We've got to stay together. Your fight is my fight, and my fight is your fight. And that's the only way that we can survive and move on.
Immigration and migrants do not cause economic problems. They cause economic good. Migrants in Britain have not lowered wages.
Over the number of years we've been together and working with you, I really admire you, because you are the ones that have been standing there and supporting us Muslims.
And that's why this march needs to be enormous. And that's why we all need to be there. And that's why building this movement that we all talk about is so important. So I hope we are all there and we get loads more people and make it a fantastic day.
No, it's no longer, you know, no dogs, no Irish, no blacks. It's now no recourse to public funds. It's no longer skinheads. It's now men in suits like Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage. It's no longer just within one political tradition. Actually, it can be found in different political traditions. But wherever it is, I know actually that here in the London borough of Haringey, we will be at the forefront of that fight. And that's why I am so happy to share this platform with others, to get invitations to stand up to racism, and why I will always take them. Thank you very much.
Do any of you remember the scenes outside Finsbury Park following that terrible attack in Finsbury Park? The first people in the door, the Haringey community from down the road. Second people in the door, us as MPs, the councillors, all of us there to express solidarity. And then by the afternoon, it was Eid, so as the sun went down and it was time to have the meal, everybody came from every street around Finsbury Park. Hackney, Haringey, Islington, Stroud Green, the park. Everybody came together with flowers and speeches, and you know, the cameras couldn't believe it. Sky News didn't know what was going on. But it just expressed us at our best. Haringey standing up against racism. Thank you.
And our job as trade unionists is to challenge racism head on, and to say that united we are stronger. We were on the picket line last week, black, white, gay, straight, the whole kit and caboodle. And that is what makes us stronger. And that is the message that needs to come out from here today. If we stand together, we confront racism, we confront the lies that migrants are to blame. We blame the real enemies, the people at the top who are getting richer and who are imposing austerity. And unity against racism, I think, is one of the most important things that as political activists, as trade unionists, we need to be doing today. And I'm really, really pleased to be sharing this diverse platform for people who come from different political parties, different political traditions, but what we have is the unity against racism, and that is the number one most important thing at this day and age. Thank you.
We must not give an inch to those people who argue that migrants cause low wages, because it's not true. And every time anybody argues that, we need to be campaigning against that and saying that they're wrong.
Fear and hatred has no place in our lives. And by being strong and united, we can and we will destroy their aims and objectives.
My name is Seema Chandwani. I am chair of the Haringey TUC, and I will be chairing this meeting today. So thank you for all coming. The snow has disappeared, which is great. So Jenny's going to start us off, but before we go ahead, I just want to tell you the purpose of this meeting. We are very fortunate in Haringey not to have a large amount of racist incidents and racist attacks, but we can't be complacent about that. There are things that do happen in our community, and some of us are not fully aware of that. So we have had 2 attacks on Tottenham High Road where hijabs have been ripped off the heads of Muslim women. That has happened in Tottenham, in our area. We have had, according to the CST, which is an organisation that monitors anti-Semitism, there was 31 reported cases of anti-Semitism in Haringey in 2017. That's about 1.5, 2 a week, 2 a fortnight. So that kind of surprises me a lot when I think of Haringey and I think of that behaviour. It's not what I associate with Haringey. So sometimes we do have to come out of our bubble where we think we live in this kind of utopia where everyone's getting along. There are things happening. We're very lucky in the 80s. We had a lot of projects and a lot of investment in community organisations to allow everyone to integrate. That's not there anymore. And new people are coming into our area and we need to have that integration come back. And we do need to do a lot of work around education. It doesn't stop just because we've reached a really good point. We've got to make sure we don't regress. We've also had, obviously, a lot of Eastern European prejudice, and that's been kind of driven by all the kind of talks around Brexit and the EU. And we also have Trump still in. So the last time I think I spoke on this platform was this time last year. It was Pancake Day, I remember, because we were talking about a tosser and I remembered why. So it was Pancake Day last year, and he's still there. And no one thought he would last, but he's still there. And we've got to make sure we don't become immune to what he's doing. It doesn't become a regular thing in our politics, some of the stuff that he's doing to Muslim communities in America, to Latin communities in America, to black communities in America, and also to how he's kind of treating other nations as well. That in itself is you know, is xenophobia. So I'm going to hand over to Jenny, who's going to be our first speaker.
So, it's really nice to be sharing a platform with all these people, all of whom, in their own ways, have taken a stand for justice and for migrants and for refugees and against racism. As Seema said, I'm the branch secretary of what used to be Tottenham College, now is, I won't even say the long name because it's too long, but with the UCU. We were on strike on Wednesday and Thursday, and it was a really, really cold picket line, but it was nice to have David to come down to give us some solidarity and some people that I can see here. So thanks very much. We've been on strike for 2 days and we've got 3 more days of strike action coming up. And the reason we were on strike is because it was yet another 1% pay settlement that we've been given. And this has come on really real terms pay cuts every year since 2009. And teachers in FE, we've lost about 24% of our wages in real terms since 2009. And I know that we're not alone. All over the public and the private sector, ordinary workers, our wages have gone down. And we all know that at the same time, the rich have got richer and inequality has grown. And in the last 10 years or so that we have lost 24% of our wages, our principals' pay has gone up by 15% in that same period. So it's not that the money isn't there, it's that it's been focused at the top, and those of us at the bottom, ordinary workers, we're being told that we have to tighten our belts, we have to pay for austerity. And I think it's quite, if you look at the figures for the gulf now between the rich and the poor, it is quite extraordinary, and it does raise the question, how have they got away with it? How have the richest people in the world got away with plundering our public sector in the way that they have? And I think the question is that they've used a really old and poisonous narrative. They've said that there aren't enough hospital beds because there's too many migrants. There aren't enough homes because there's too many foreigners. Wages have gone down because there's too many migrant workers, there's too many immigrants. And I think that narrative has been one of the most poisonous elements that has poisoned the political discourse for the last 10 years or so, and has really allowed the Tories to get away with austerity in a way that they'd never have done before. The whole debate around Brexit, which couched in terms of it's either European workers to blame for lowering wages on the one hand, or it's people from outside Europe, refugees trying to come in, that are lowering wages and threatening our way of life. And I think it's really clear that as workers here, we have to say loudly and strongly that our wages have not gone down because of migrants. All the evidence And I think in 2014 it was, the Tories themselves produced a report where this report said that between 2001 and 2011, migrants had made a net contribution to the economy of £25 billion. And just last week, in The Guardian, there was an article saying that migrant workers in the social care sector contribute about £4 billion every year to the economy. Migrants have always put more in to this country than they have taken out. From the first wave of immigrants, whether it was the Jews, the Irish, people from the Commonwealth, from the Caribbean, from Southeast Asia, and more recently from Europe, migrants have always put more in to the economy. They've paid more in taxes than they've taken in goods and services. But that narrative that migrants to blame is simply divide and rule. And it's a narrative that the British ruling class, well, they're experts. They've been doing it since slavery days, and they continue to do it. And I think as a trade unionist in Britain today, what we have to say loud and clear is that it's the bosses that lower wages, it's greedy landlords that raise rent, and the way that workers, that we get better wages and conditions is if we stand together. People in a trade union, workers in a trade union, earn at least 10% more than workers that aren't unionised. And our job as trade unionists is to challenge racism head on and to say that united we are stronger. We were on the picket line last week, black, white, gay, straight, the whole kit and caboodle. And that is what makes us stronger. And that is the message that needs to come out from here today. If we stand together, we confront racism, we confront the lies that migrants are to blame, we blame the real enemies, the people at the top who are getting richer and who are imposing austerity. And unity against racism, I think, is one of the most important things that as political activists, as trade unionists, we need to be doing today. And I'm really, really pleased to be sharing this diverse platform for people who come from different political parties, different political traditions, but what we have is the unity against racism, and that is the number one most important thing at this day and age. Thank you.
Here he comes again. Now is he going to come? We have got some seats at the front, so we can don't bring out any more chairs because there's actually a bit of an empty spot here. Okay, so I'm now going to introduce you to David. David has been the MP since 2000 for Tottenham. That's like 18 years, isn't it? There are some pictures on Google about what it looked like 18 years ago, if you ever want to check. Can I hand you over to David?
I think there are some people in the audience who are feeling a little bit older because you said that, because they've known me all of that time. I think it's really important just to pause and to say how grateful we are for being able to hold this event at this mosque. And we thank Bibi for that. And we also send our love and our prayers to Mr. Ali, who we know is not well. And that is a really good place to start, because gathered here as we are in this particular London borough to talk about the issue of racism, we are so, so lucky. And I feel this more than I ever have in my life, frankly, that now I'm the father of 3 children, that they are being raised, they are going to school, they are on the streets in this London borough, because this is a very, very, very special London borough when it comes to this subject. It's been at the forefront of fights against racism, and we are in this mosque because of people like Mr. Ali and because of the great Bernie Grant before me that fought so hard to keep communities together, to stand up to racism and prejudice against horrible vilification at times. And I think that is particularly poignant because there was a period, probably round about the time when I was elected, when there just felt like there was a moment when some of those big battles, vicious battles of the 1980s, 70s, felt like they had been won. And we gather here at this point in time, I felt fully aware that how complacent we were. They were not won. And that nasty, virulent sense of othering people, sense of discriminating against people is alive and well in our society. And that's why I think people are coming out in the numbers they are on platforms like this, which are so important. And so what is going on? We've got a paradox. I suppose on one level, we have the engagement of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Some foolishly rung me up to ask me if this was a post-racial moment. We have also got our scientists gathering together to remind us about the origins of Cheddar Man. And I was, very keen to tweet that I was now a member of Britain First.
Go back home.
And to tell those in Britain First to go back home. So on some levels, the news, you get these moments, don't you? But my God, they are small, tiny moments in a context that's deeply, deeply worrying. We have a man in the White House who has demonstrated sympathies and alliances with the Ku Klux Klan. We have a man in the White House who has propagated the venom of Britain First and is pathological, frankly, in his Islamophobia. I was very privileged in October to be invited out to join fellow congressmen and senators in the Black Caucus in Washington. And it was really important to hear the detail of wonderful freedom fighters who marched with Martin Luther King, like Joe Louis, who campaigned so much for civil rights, but to hear the detail of how Trump, with his Attorney General Jeff Sessions, is actually rolling back civil rights legislation as we speak. This is not the stuff that you read about. There's so much you read about in the papers over here, but that is what is currently going on. And when I said to him, look, is it important for me to encourage people to campaign to stop Trump coming to Britain? Is it important to sort of demonstrate? He said, absolutely. And the Black Caucus stand with you and want to encourage you in just telling people how vicious this is. I might say I tweeted at the point that I was at the Black Caucus, and of course those of you who look at my Twitter feed know the sorts of responses I get. One of the milder responses was, why are you at the Black Caucus? Where's the White Caucus? Well, the White Caucus sits every week in Washington. Why are we suddenly against the ability to self-organise and self-affirm? This is 100 years we celebrate those great suffragettes. Can you imagine if at that time there was not a space in which women could not get together with other women to self-organise, as well as being in alliance with men and others to take forward that charge? So even the business of self-organisation is under attack at this particular point in time. Last week, many of us were together celebrating Haringey welcome to refugees and migrants. And what's the story behind that? It is a story of no recourse to public funds. It is a heartbreaking. I've been into homes in this London borough, in this sixth richest economy in the world, in which there are families with no food, only a pot noodle in the cupboard, but 3 kids to feed. That's what no recourse to public funds actually means. And you know too that the face of the working poor and those who are really at the margins is most often a black and ethnic minority face. You know too that the face of that fight for justice is probably so best personified in recent times by those wonderful, wonderful people that lost their lives in Grenfell Tower. And you know, that was also a moment just after our last election where all of us in this room thought, right, now let's have the debate about social housing. Now let's have the debate about social justice. And even in the face of that tragedy, how quickly the narrative turned to why were they here in the first place? Many of them were illegal. You know, they don't have our values. It's so quickly the othering of these human beings. And the word that keeps coming to me, really standing up in Parliament so often now and putting forward issues of race, is dignity. That we have lost the capacity to give other human beings the dignity that we would afford ourselves. And these people, now on our landscape, now given such free rein, people like Nigel Farage. You know, I in many ways, I applaud our public broadcaster. I applaud the BBC. But I do have to ask, why is this man who has run for office 7 times and lost, who barely has a political party, why is he given the platform yet again on Question Time? Have we learned nothing about racism, fascism and prejudice and what it does in our society? Have we learned, is it, or are we now literally living in a sort of Jerry Springer country in which it's just entertainment? Well, it isn't just entertainment. We know where it ends. And that's why it's just so important to stand up to racism. So it's a paradox, but it's a paradox in which the same old things are happening. No, it's no longer, you know, no dogs, no Irish, no blacks. It's now no recourse to public funds. It's no longer skinheads. It's now men in suits like Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage. It's no longer just within one political tradition. Actually, it can be found in different political traditions. But wherever it is, I know actually that here in the London borough of Haringey, we will be at the forefront of that fight. And that's why I am so happy to share this platform with others, to get invitations to stand up to racism, and why I will always take them. Thank you very much.
Is the secretary of this amazing mosque. Can we just also give her a huge round of applause, not only because she's about to speak, but really, because she allowed us to have this space in the first place. And we don't, you know, Stand Up to Racism is run by volunteers. We have very little money. Because we're not seen as a place where there is a lot of racial tension, it's not seen as the kind of forefront of kind of where our money should go when we're thinking about donating. But, you know, so we're really, really, really grateful when we get offers of spaces like this to use for free. If you do want to donate to Haringey Stand Up for Racism, here's my plug, then there is a standing order form at the back. I understand that we're in austerity, so please give if you can. But in the meantime, Bibi Khan.
Thank you so much. And Seema, I know that equation, if you like, because we were English speaking from Guyana and we didn't fit into any of the categories for help with the community centre either.
That's right.
So anyway, brothers and sisters, our friends, Assalamu alaikum. May the peace and blessings of Almighty God be with us all. I'm going to read my speech because I think I might forget some because it's been a really tense time at home. But this was something that my father would say to me was an obligation. It isn't something that we do for fun, and it isn't something that we can ignore. It's something that he feels we have an obligation. And so therefore, I'm not to sit beside his bed. I'm supposed to be here to deliver this or wherever it's needed. So I would like to say, David said a little bit, which I'm so grateful for, David, is welcome to all of you, and many of you are friends because you've been here before. It's a privilege to be able to allow you to use this space, which we consider to be a community hub. Yes, it falls within the mosque, but our mosque is not something that's just set aside for prayers. It's set aside for the whole of our life, for our whole existence. And whichever way that we can use the facilities at the mosque, then we should use it. Whether it's to build relationships with groups or whether it's actually do something like we're doing today, it is something that is a duty upon us. And where I come from, and David comes from as well, it's very much that we brought to England, if you like, and it's continued here, where people of all different faiths, all different nationality and diversities come together to share that absolute amazing cultures that we all have. So you may be aware that my dad, Brother Ali, who is the founder and visionary leader of this mosque, is seriously ill. We as a family are doing all we can to make him comfortable and to ease his journey. He is very much what I would call an activist and has been for many, many years. Since Tariq Ali was around, I know my dad used to attend all those marches. His commitment to the causes that we all support is the reason why our mosque is so involved in equality, diversity, objectives to what is right and downright discriminatory, to peoples of faith and of none. He was regularly at many marches with Stop the War and CND, to just mention a few. So today, what is our concern? Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, inequality of black and ethnic minorities, issues facing our sisters, being spat on just because they're wearing their hijabs. Many of us may not even experience it because even I don't wear the hijab outside, so I might not actually experience that. But that doesn't mean that children, young girls or sisters who want to wear the hijab should not be able to wear the hijabs outside. And of course there's general abuse. You know, we have about 200 children that come here on a Monday to Friday for what we call the madrasas. The madrasas are not just Islamic school. They teach children about integration, they teach children about respect, and they teach children to acknowledge everyone's faith, because you can't understand your faith if you don't know what the other one says. You cannot do that. You're not in isolation. We are totally against all acts of anti-Semitism. We at LICS value our interfaith connections with our friends from our brothers and sisters from the Jewish faith, in addition to all the churches in Haringey who we have also a great connection with. In fact, to be quite honest, it's like a family. It's like brothers and sisters coming together at different times. And you'd forget sometimes maybe you all differ on certain things, but somehow you do connect and you mix, and it's really amazing. I've had the church in Father Simon's church in Wood Green, Sister Elizabeth, the diocese in Stroud Green Road, the Muswell Hill Synagogue, they've all been saying to me that they're doing prayers for my dad. And that's what I call something really special, when you as an individual can have all these people praying for you. We believe that talking, connecting and supporting, we're much stronger by doing that. And when we face hatred, that we face it together. And we refuse to let the racists separate us. We see every day how the media brainwashes the public into believing that all Muslims are bad, they're terrorists. They want to take away your freedom. They want to actually change your way of life. So if you wore a short skirt, you don't want to be like a Muslim woman, do you? Because they were all covered up. You don't see anything. Well, sometimes, I guess. But that's a no. Why are we as Muslims going to want to do that? We believe in our religion that we respect all of mankind. Of course, like with any nationality, any culture, any creed, you have people that are different and who do want to do some of these things, but you don't stain the whole of that religion because of a few people. And I have to say that I really admire all of you, because over the number of years we've been together and working with you, I really admire you, because you are the ones that have been standing there and supporting us Muslims. And thank you so much for doing that for us. I refuse to allow bigots and racists to colour my life, my children's life, and that of my community. Fear and hatred has no place in our lives. And by being strong and united, we can and we will destroy their aims and objectives. And I know if we go back to when we were marching for the Iraq War, well, we didn't succeed, but you know what? It brought so many of us together, and we've all maintained those links. I cannot end my contribution without sharing my dismay, anger, fear and concern about a certain president. Commander of the free world, it says, where he thinks he is that, but in truth he's not. And if you look at religion, sometimes it tells you some of these signs that should come. He is a master of division, ignorance, hatred, and creating chaos. He rules by dividing, by playing on people's fears, and he has no concerns about the animosity he has created worldwide by his reckless actions. His unwarranted criticisms of countries, where he is guilty of doing much worse. He's not the only one. He's the current one. We know we've had other experiences with other presidents, right? I know also what happened in Guyana, to talk about Guyana, when Chedi Jagan was actually ousted by the US government and Britain. And I remember seeing a World in Action program where even a dog was registered as a voter. You know, that was a World in Action. In those days, World in Action was like Panorama or one of those things. It was really credible. And I remember I was much younger then, and I thought, oh, and they all said to me that in 30 years' time, there'll be secrets released about what really took place in Guyana. But who has military bases in all these countries? You know, who launched the first atomic bomb? Who routinely overthrow legitimate governments? And who supports countries where there are open prisons for people? Who supports those and keeps them? Just the other day, I had somebody who came back from Palestine, and he said, he was so dismayed, and he said to me, you know, when you look at some of the streets, you see somebody with an arm missing, somebody with an eye. You know, the people who are there, they're maimed in somewhere. There's a woman who's without child or husband or something like this. And he was saying how distressing it was, where even the Saudi governments and the other Emirates, how they actually help with the seizing of land as well in that country by offering some of the Palestinians more money to be able to get it, and then it's sold to somebody else, like a Jewish person. Now, I know that those are controversial things, but we can't turn our eyes to what's going on in Palestine. It's heartbreaking. You know, we look at Rwanda and the Rohingya Muslims, and we really, really feel for them, but we're also ignoring what's going on in Palestine. And so many people have been bombed, so many people have been killed, so many children have been killed, and I'm telling you, it's not us, it's not the Muslims who've done it. You know, it's the US led by their coalitions as well, or even a lot of the times on their own. So my fear is that I saw the other day that Mr. Trump is going to stand in 2020 as well for another. And I really hope and I really pray that that's not what's going to happen, because it has a devastating effect on all of our communities. We here in this mosque will always speak to our young ones and encourage them to share the platforms of discussions. And I think that we've got so much more work to do with our young people. So I'll really, just to end, I wanted to say, my brothers and sisters, we've got to stay united. We've got to stay together. Your fight is my fight, and my fight is your fight. And that's the only way that we can survive and move on. So thank you so, so much.
The next speaker is Sabby Dhalu. Sabby is the National Co-Convenor for Stand Up to Racism, and she's also a Haringey resident. It really does all stem from Haringey. Like, if Haringey didn't exist, nothing would be happening in the world. Can I give you Sabby?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Seema, and a big thank you to Bibi for welcoming us here and hosting this meeting. And I think you're absolutely right. Your fight is our fight, and we stand in solidarity with the Muslim community that is facing such horrendous Islamophobia at the moment. I don't know how many of you picked up Viktor Orban's speech last week, the president of Hungary, who claimed that Hungary was somehow the last bastion of the Islamization of Europe, as though, you know, we're in the 16th century and, you know, these sort of facing, you know, Sultan Suleiman, you know, and his Ottoman Empire, you know, as though, you know, we're sort of harking back to 500 years ago or something. So, and actually nothing could be further from the truth. I don't think there is any threat of a Islamic or Muslim or whatever takeover. But I think there is a real danger of a racist and far-right takeover of Europe. Because if you look at recent elections in European countries, so in Austria, we have the Freedom Party in coalition government with the right-wing Conservative People's Party. In Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland have gained 51 seats in the German parliament. That's the first time a far-right racist party has gained seats in the German national parliament since the Nazis gained seats in the 1930s. And in Italy tomorrow, we'll soon find out what will happen then. But it's not looking very good. I think you're going to get a far right-wing racist populist coalition between Berlusconi's Forza Italia, the horrendously sounding, and they are as horrendous as they sound, the Brothers of Italy and the Northern League, plus this right-wing populist Five-Star Party. That's the likely outcome of tomorrow's election in Italy, because they are both Berlusconi's coalition plus the Five-Star Party are polling around 30% or more, and the Social Democrats are lagging behind on around sort of 25-27%. So who knows what will happen, but it's not looking great in Italy. And obviously this follows in the US, the election of Donald Trump and a whole growth of racism there, both politically but also on the ground in terms of racist attacks and Islamophobic attacks in the US. And also the highest result for the Front National, with Marine Le Pen's high vote in the French presidential election last year. And now Britain maybe bucking this electoral trend for the moment, but I think there are some worrying signs here. We may not have such a political crisis in terms of the far right here right now as we speak, but we do have a social crisis in that we have a growing number of racist attacks on the ground. The recent statistics show that there's been a 29% increase in racist attacks, 80% of this a 29% increase in hate crimes, and 80% of this were racist attacks, and an alarming rise in anti-Muslim hate crime. Last year there was more than doubling of anti-Muslim hate crime. This was unfortunately a racist and Islamophobic response to the terrorist attacks that we saw last year. And I think, let's be clear, there is no link between the majority of Muslims and Islam and terrorism. Terrorism has no religion, and the vast majority of the Muslim community stand up to and oppose terrorism, and any attempt to make a link between Islam and the Muslim community and terrorism is straightforwardly racist and Islamophobic, and we have to understand this, and we cannot make any concessions to such arguments. And actually we've seen that people making concessions to racism and Islamophobia is what has led to the growth of right-wing racist political parties in Europe. But I think we have to understand what's underpinning this political crisis and I guess social crisis on the ground in terms of racist attacks. It is an economic crisis. A deliberate economic policy by this current government here and also other European governments, which are deliberately making the majority of the population worse off, whilst making sure that the wealthiest in society become richer and richer. And this is a deliberate economic policy, and it's causing the sort of things that David Lammy described, with people having to feed families on a pot noodle, and also I heard stories of people with families to feed having to walk through miles and miles of blizzard conditions and freezing sub-zero temperatures to go to a food bank because they didn't have enough money to feed their family, but they had to make treacherous journeys through the snow in order to be able to feed their families. That shouldn't be happening in one of the richest countries in the world, and it shouldn't be happening anywhere. But this crisis is a deliberate crisis of governments, and they cannot say to the population, well, it's our economic policy that's causing these problems, so don't vote for us. So this is the function that racism and Islamophobia plays by providing a scapegoat, blaming immigrants, blaming refugees, and distracting the population with this fear of, Islamization and that sort of thing. And that's the function of racism and Islamophobia at the moment, and that's why we have to stand up to it and challenge it and make sure we're not making any concessions. But on the point of concessions, I think one of the reasons why we're bucking the trend in Britain at the moment is because we have a principled anti-racist in the leadership of the Labour Party. That's why you have a very polarised situation where all the far right-wing racists are backing Theresa May's racist Conservative Party, and you have everyone else supporting Jeremy Corbyn. We have a very highly polarised situation here amongst the mainstream parties, if you can call the Tories racist mainstream at the moment. Did you hear the Freudian slip just there? Yes, you can call the Tories racist at the moment. And I think the reason why Corbyn's Labour Party is doing better than Social Democrats in Europe, because Corbyn has an answer to the economic crisis. He is saying we need to make people better off, we need to put the economy first, we need to put people's living standards first, we need to put jobs first. And secondly, he is saying we cannot put up with racism. It's alarming, the rise in racism that's occurred following Brexit. We cannot blame immigrants for this crisis. Immigrants have been the engine of growth in this economy, and we have to stand up to Islamophobia. He's condemned the rise in Islamophobia. So we have a principled anti-racist in the leadership of the Labour Party, and this is why we've got a different situation here, whereas Social Democrats in European countries don't have a solution to the economic crisis, are not putting forward policies that are against neoliberalism and that are against austerity. They concede to that economic policy, and they concede to racism and Islamophobia, and that's proved disastrous in the polls. And so I think Corbyn, the leadership of the Corbyn Labour Party, is a very good answer to those who have consistently peddled this argument that somehow standing up to racism is somehow unpopular with the electorate. Well, it quite clearly is not, and I think the current polls at the moment prove that that's not the case. So I think it's important that we stand up to austerity and also stand up to racism and Islamophobia. It is good that we've got Corbyn, Diane Abbott, John McDonnell and others in the leadership of the Labour Party at the moment, but we obviously cannot leave it to the Labour Party. We have to build a movement against racism. We have to say everybody, when it comes to racism, should be as anti-racist as Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott, and that's why we have Stand Up to Racism. And this year's March Against Racism in 2 weeks' time, on the 17th of March, could not be more timely. It's a Europe-wide and international day of action, in fact, because there's also demonstrations in European cities, but also in the US and Australia. So across the globe, people will be demonstrating. So join us in London at BBC Portland Place at 12 p.m. in 2 weeks' time, because there could not be a more important time to stand up to racism. Thank you.
Thank you. In a couple of minutes, Vivek, who keeps putting out new chairs every time. There is space at the front, Vivek, so don't feel you've got to give everyone who comes in the room a chair. He's going to pass around some posters, because we really do need to promote this 17th of March demo, so we can have some big photo shoot as well and let everyone know. If we're going to have everybody living in Haringey that's against racism, then we better have the biggest picture that's going to go out on social media from Haringey as well. Our next speaker is Oktay, and Oktay, as I explained before, is from Day-Mer, which is a Turkish Kurdish organisation based in Tottenham. So Oktay.
Thank you. Everyone, a big thanks to Stand Up to Racism for giving us the opportunity to speak at this panel. I mean, check out this panel. I mean, can you get a more diverse panel than this? And I'll tell you what tops it up. We've also got bottles of water from Turkey. I mean, if you want to annoy someone, take a picture, tweet it, and I'm sure some of the racist people out there will be really annoyed with that. So, I'm from Day-Mer, which is a Turkish and Kurdish community organisation in London. When it comes to racism, we have a very simple answer. We basically say integration. But we have a subline under that term integration. We say integration under the banner of common struggle for common demands, for common needs. And we try to make sure that that is the sort of integration that we can achieve. Because we know that if people can come together around their common needs and demand the same thing, then there will be none of this judgment of each other. There is none of this, not knowing each other. It's an opportunity for people to get to know and fight together against common struggles and common demands. And I think that's very important. And I think, obviously, as a teacher, it's very easy for me to say that I don't see racism taking place in the playground of my school. Because I have students over there who are there for a common purpose, who are coming there together to learn, and there's no one over there to divide that unity. There's no one over there to create issues or tensions between people. But what we need to do is, I think, in terms of understanding this whole aspect of tackling racism, it's very important that we try to replicate that school playground in all aspects of our life. I think if we are able to bring people together where the people can get to know each other, get to stand for common demands or struggles in a workplace, for public services or whatever, that is when we can actually build the sort of unity that will tackle any sort of racism. And when Vivek was inviting me to this meeting, he said, Oktay, it might be a good idea for you to maybe talk a little bit about migrant workers. Now, I think the migrant workers in this sense is very important. Being a migrant worker is very important. Because I think when you're a worker, when you're working for someone, yes, you get exploited as a worker. But when you're a migrant worker, you get exploited, but then you also have to put up with the racism, you have to put up with the harassment and so on, as well at the same time. And I think there are lots of examples of that where we can look around. We can look at about how some of the BME workers are being treated. I think there was a research done recently about BME teachers, even in areas where there is high number of migrant people. the percentage of teachers representing that particular community from BME backgrounds was 1%, 2%, and no more than 5%. So I think in terms of building movements against racism, I think workplaces are very, very important. And I think that the first thing we have to do is understanding those migrant workers. But what tends to happen with migrant workers are, they're also the sort of workers that can isolate themselves from everyone else. I mean, I'm from a Turkish and Kurdish community, and I know that most members of my community work in the Turkish restaurants, in the Turkish shops, and so on. And sometimes the reason why they work in those particular areas is because of their skills, their qualifications, whatever. But sometimes it's about not being able to break into those mainstream jobs and taking part on those, simply because they either feel scared, or they feel they're going to be, they're going to be facing racism, or they feel like they're not going to be treated fairly, and so on. And so they tend to isolate themselves. And when they work in environments like that, although they're not the greatest environments, they are exploited much more. They're probably being asked to work 6 days, 12 hours a day, on wages which is below the living wage and minimum wage. But I think once we understand migrant workers, I think then there is a duty about bringing migrant workers and native workers together. And that needs to come from not just the workers themselves, but it needs to come from the trade union movement in this country as well. So I think if we can get more migrant workers to be in trade unions, and not only that, if we can make sure that those migrant workers, we are standing with those migrant workers side by side, defending our public services, defending our schools, defending our hospitals, demanding better working conditions, better pay. That's probably the best way that we can tackle racism of all kinds. And also, I think it's very clear that whenever there is a problem, the migrants are being attacked. I mean, even during this Brexit, all these Brexit negotiations. Although we have a Prime Minister who half of the time doesn't seem to have a clue about what she's doing about Brexit, whenever she's stuck, she talks about freedom of movement, she talks about the number of migrants in this country, so they try to bring up to the agenda every time. And it's quite clear that, this creates tension, this creates issues between communities and so on. Okay, but friends, I think that the deep problem is about the economical system that we are living in. It's about capitalism. I mean, I think we need to understand that, and I think some of the speakers have already said that. We have an economical system, not just in this country, but around the world, who's struggling. Capitalism, when capitalism doesn't work, when it's quite clear that the economical policies that they try to bring up does not work, they use the old, as Jenny said, they use the poisonous narrative of divide and rule. And what's very easy for them to do is divide people by ethnicity, by religion, and so on, and then have a go at that. We've heard so much examples of what Trump is trying to do in America. But it's not only him. Let's look around us. In Europe, Austria is another one. Hungary is another one. Sabby mentioned what's happening in Italy at the moment. There is a movement, there's the right-wing agenda who's trying to promote itself by basically having a go at the migrants who've been coming from the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. And they're the sort of stuff that's happening. But also, the same idea is happening from the country that I'm from Turkey. It's quite clear that the Prime Minister or the President of Turkey, when things go wrong, he is very good at creating a tension between communities and so on. So it's happening anywhere and everywhere, and I think it's very important that we fight it everywhere as well. But I kind of feel that we are slightly lucky in Britain, because I had the pleasure of speaking at an event called the Battle of Wood Green. I think, when you are finding about stuff like that, about the community that you live in, there's the sort of things that not just makes you proud, but also it's something that you can pass on to the other generations, to your community. I think we've had lots of stuff being done with the Turkish and Kurdish community, telling them about the Battle of Wood Green, and I think that's very important. And I think in terms of, like I said, we're lucky, but I think, we shouldn't just say that, but we should try to make sure that in Britain that we make that struggle bigger. You know, there's a massive anti-racism movement in this country. You know, organizations like Stand Up to Racism, Unite Against Fascism, you know, and most recently the Stand Up to Trump. These are very organizations, and I think what we need to do is we need to try and build that. I think it's very important that we get the migrant communities involved in these movements as much as we can. And I think for those people who are sitting in this room, for us, we all have a duty. You know, I think in terms of our neighborhoods, in terms of our schools, in terms of our workplaces, it's very important that we go and speak to them, we get them involved, and we make sure that this is a movement which can have a proper stand to any form of racism and discrimination in this country. Thank you.
MP for Hornsey Wood Green, which is across the road, not here, because we're in Tottenham, as I've just been corrected. And so I give you Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Seema. It's a real pleasure to be here again. And Bibi, from this meeting, can we just send all our love and best wishes to Brother Ali, who, of course, is the founder of this mosque. And you'd all know, of course, before this was a synagogue. And it's the same as the Hindu temple on Archway Road, which was a synagogue. And before that, it was a Congregationalist church. And it just shows what an amazing history we have here in Haringey, and the fact that we have what David always described to me as a rainbow coalition, and a real sense that wherever you are from, your values, our values are all about together we are stronger and not dividing the community. So it's a fantastic pleasure to be here. And also, it's really the opposite, I think, to what the government talks about when it talks about a hostile environment for people whose immigration status isn't regularised. And last time I spoke at the March Against Racism event at Friend's House, I talked about the work that we'd done in Parliament on with Alf Dabbs, Lord Dabbs, on the children migrants. And I just briefly wanted to talk about a visit that I did last week to Brook Detention Centre, and I'm very pleased that in the audience today we have a legal advisor, Nigel, who's here, who will be able to give you chapter and verse. I'm giving you a politician's impressionistic view, but we're so happy that we have committed legal advisors who go into detention centres and talk to people who are in trouble, who really don't have a constituency MP because they may have moved around a lot, or they may have lost touch with their address and therefore don't have an MP. And I went in with some visitors to talk to people who are detained, and as many of you are aware, indefinitely. And they're the only sort of person in detention in this country who count up when they're detained rather than counting down, because most people who are in detention count down because they have a sentence, they know how much time they've got to go. But there is a real sense of people just being forgotten. And I think the sense of loneliness and depression and anxiety and desperation that those people face is something which I think we can all campaign against as people who believe in a fairer world. We know that half of these people, of the 27,000 who are detained every year, half of them are released back to the community anyway. It's simply that the Home Office hasn't got the resources to go through their case and make a decision on it. So they're sort of put aside and almost forgotten. And it's wonderful that we have fantastic advisors like Nigel who go in, help these people, and try and help resolve these issues. And that's something which myself, David, Diane Abbott and others are working on. Yarlswood is the more well-known women's centre, but the one that I went into was at Gatwick. And it's just extraordinary to think just a few miles down there are people who are behind bars for they don't know what, they haven't been given a sentence, they haven't got proper representation. And I think that, for me, this march is going to be... That's my focus for this march.
Well done.
The second thing I wanted to say briefly on the hostile environment concept is, you would remember during the 2015 election that Turnpike Lane, we actually saw one of the go-home vans. And in the 2015 election, I thought we campaigned very hard against that, and I thought we were really getting somewhere. And I think, as our speakers have said, we are getting somewhere with the values and the vision which Jeremy has put before in terms of his history of being an anti-racist and committing himself to communities. Of course, he was a Haringey councillor originally, not very far from here, actually, may even have been this ward, and always worked very closely with Cypriot communities, Jewish communities, the lot, and I think therefore is bringing those values into Parliament. I briefly wanted also to talk about the point that Oktay made about public services. We know that austerity actually has quite a racist edge to it, because if you think about pensioner poverty, who are the pensioners in Haringey who are most affected by the cutbacks and the fuel poverty? If you think about housing policy, if we don't have very many 3 or 4 bedroom places in some of our housing developments, who are the families who tend to have bigger families? That tends to be ethnic minority families. In terms of university entrance, which David has done a lot of work on, who are the young people who are missing out on those top places at university in our borough? It will tend to be our able students who are being held back either by racism or by other barriers to their attainment. So in all those ways, we can still say that sadly there is a very strong element of institutionalised racism. And another issue which I think we all care very deeply about is the area of youth services. And we know that so many young people now, through desperation, through a sense of feeling hopeless, there is more use of knives and guns. And that's something which sadly also has, if you look at it as a racist attack, there are also young black men every day who are at threat, at risk of harm. And that's something which we are not taking seriously enough. And that's something which we can learn from Black Lives Matter, which began in the US, but which is also an active group here. And that may be a future speaker for us to have at a future point. I'm sure there's work that's being done in our community centres on that, and something which we need to take equal responsibility for. So let's try and take some hope, though, because I think if we continue to talk like this, we might end up having a bit of a council of despair, which I don't think is very good. So I want to conclude with 2 really hopeful remarks. The first thing is young people. And I'm so pleased that in the Hornsey and Wood Green Labour Party, we're seeing a really large group of young people coming together. And we were just saying as we came into this afternoon that they've had another meeting this week talking about their challenges, what they want to see. They self-organise, these young people. They've got their own chair, secretary, campaigns, and I'm hoping that they will come on the march in 2 weeks' time. So, number 1, young people are joining the Labour Party, which is a fantastic thing. Number 2, let's think back to that awful terror attack in Finsbury Park and the following people who said they wanted to kill Jeremy Corbyn. They want to kill that idea and Jeremy's ideas because they're frightened of them. Because we want to have a closer society. We want to have a society without the sort of racial barriers which exist. And that does frighten a lot of people. But it needn't, because we know that if we are together, we are stronger and we are at one, then we can be that equal society that we want to see. And do any of you remember the scenes outside Finsbury Park following that terrible attack in Finsbury Park? The first people in the door, the Haringey community from down the road. Second people in the door, us as MPs, the councillors, all of us there to express solidarity. And then by the afternoon, it was Eid, so as the sun went down and it was time to have the meal, everybody came from every street around Finsbury Park. Hackney, Haringey, Islington, Stroud Green, the park. Everybody came together with flowers and speeches, and you know, the cameras couldn't believe it. Sky News didn't know what was going on. But it just expressed us at our best. Haringey standing up against racism. Thank you.
Who is the National Vice Chair of Stand Up to Racism, and also a Haringey resident. We've really got to be careful, aren't we? Because they're just going to come for Haringey when they get the power. And shortly after that, we're going to do the kind of group photo, because we've been sitting down for a while, so it'd be good to stand up. And then we'll come back and do either some Q&As, but I've done loads of Q&As before, and I know that no one really answers a question. You're just going to make a statement. So you can do Q&As or statements, but we'll keep them brief. So Steve.
Comrade, first of all, I want to try and persuade you all that you must come to the March Against Racism on the 17th of March, and you must get as many people as possible to come on it. I think it's been a fantastic initiative that we've Stand Up to Racism has organised. The march is on, or very close to, UN Anti-Racism Day. It actually came out of a visit by another Haringey resident and myself, Wightman Bennett and myself, to Greece and 5 years ago. And the Greek comrades needed to organise against Golden Dawn. And they suggested that we organise across Europe marches like this to celebrate UN Anti-Racism Day. And we've been doing it, and it's been growing across the world. And it's a really important day for us to establish that we are united against racism. So it's appropriate we make a little bit of an assessment now about where we are, as many people on the platform have been making. Like Catherine, I think we can actually draw some positives from the last year. We had a general election in which racism and immigration were there, but they weren't actually nearly as dominant as they've been in some other general elections. UKIP has been smashed. We wanted to smash UKIP. And, many of us worked hard in all sorts of different ways, and we all had an intelligent approach to UKIP, not labelling them as fascist, but saying they're a nasty, xenophobic nationalist party that had to be brought down. Although I think one could argue that our help wasn't really needed in destroying UKIP. They did quite well by themselves, you know. But I do also think that we can draw from positives out of the appalling terrorist incidents in London and Manchester, because by and large, the communities of London and Manchester and nationally were united in saying we will not be divided. We will not allow this to divide us, people against people. Of course, there were minorities, and I'll get onto that, small minorities, who carried out appalling acts of violence around that, and we need to understand that. But in general, it demonstrated, like as Catherine says, and you know, the amazing. It feels wrong to talk about it like this because somebody died and was murdered by a horrible fascist terrorist in Finsbury Park. But actually, good came out of it as well because of the unanimity of the community around that, and I think that's a positive. So I do think that we can say actually that our progressive values are becoming dominant in many ways, and especially in cities like London. Our views of those that celebrate this multicultural city are the dominant views in London, and they are across Britain. But there are so many negatives that we have to take account of. So many negatives. The first level of negative I'd talk about, I'd compare to the feminist advances of recent months and weeks, the Me Too movement and all that. In a sense, I think all of that stuff is about exposing things that everybody knew was happening. You know, there's even a word for it in the film industry, the casting couch. Everybody knew these things were happening, but it is going on in plain sight. Sexual violence, sexual harassment, in plain sight in loads and loads of institutions. And women have said it's got to stop. And I think there will be a step change. I mean, how much of a step change we'll see, but there will be a step change. But where are we on issues of race? Well, we've got Black Lives Matter, and it's actually about black people dying and being shot and murdered. But in how many areas are there issues like Yarl's Wood, or deaths in police custody, or blatant discrimination? All the surveys that say that if you apply for a job as Khan, you won't get an interview. If you apply for a job as Smith, you do get the interview. We know these things are happening, yet they're tolerated, and it's in plain sight. So just basic race discrimination carries on at a level, and utterly intolerable level, and we have to, at some point, have the step change at the Me Too stuff seems to be bringing about. But more than that, it's the international situation and the nature of fascism also in this country that we really need to be concerned about. We've heard about Italy, Poland, the Holocaust denial almost seems to be becoming official. Hungary and all the attacks on George Soros, authoritarian government that is attacking George Soros. And for anti-Semitism, to be picked up in exactly the same way as it's being used in Hungary on the front pages of our major papers for the first time since the 30s is also appalling. But you've got Italy, you've got France, AFD, you've got Holland. Fascist movements across Europe are becoming stronger than they've been at any time in my lifetime. They pose a real threat. And not only that, they are linked into what is close to a fascist movement in the US. You wouldn't call Trump a fascist, but he is linked into things which do amount to that. I mean, the actual Nazis are on the streets in America. Actual Nazis are shooting people in towns in America. And they're tolerated and they're part of the alt-right that Trump is part of. Steve Bannon, who is a leader of part of that alt-right, is in Italy today meeting the Lega Nord. So he's meeting one of, which is very close to fascist. They are organising. They're meeting. Marine Le Pen is in Washington, in the White House, I think meeting Trump. These links are going on. They are organising fascists in Europe. And Trump and Bannon and the alt-right from America see that as part of the same movement. And they are linked into Britain as well. UKIP might be down, but they're not out. The Aaron Banks and so on are preparing for new movements, new parties, whatever. We've got National Action, we've got the actual fascists, who the police, who are now interested in them, are saying had 4 major plots that were foiled last year, 28 fascist terrorists were in courts last year. That is a real threat. But beyond that, we have got what I think is a perfect storm of Brexit coming. Whatever your view about Brexit, you can just imagine every scenario possible, and you see opportunities for the far right to really exploit it. It seems to me that we're more likely moving towards a hard Brexit at the moment because Theresa May is putting up a no-deal Brexit, an impossible position for the EU. If we go down that very hard Brexit, the Tory party probably splits, and we will have serious economic problems. In those serious economic problems, whose fault will it be? It'll be the cosmopolitans of Europe and the migrants in Britain. And the potential in a broken-up Tory party as well for a real far-right, potentially fascist party grows. There could be a soft Brexit, and the economic problems that will come from that will all be blamed on the EU. Authoritarian nationalism will grow here. We could have a Corbyn government. And of course, in a Corbyn government that will be affected by these Brexit problems and not a difficult economic situation, however good Jeremy and our policies will be in that government, when do fascist movements grow above all else? When there's a strong left? Is that not a situation in which the Rees-Moggs of this world, in a very cultured way, an Etonian way, move towards fascism, rather like Oswald Mosley? I mean, think of any scenario to do with Brexit and the growth of fascism in this country and the regrowth of the UKIP movement seems entirely possible to me and a real danger. And that's why we've got to be so clear that we are organising and we are monitoring them and we're arguing above all and continuing the argument about immigration. Jenny right at the beginning made the point, really important. Immigration and migrants do not cause economic problems. They cause economic good. Migrants in Britain have not lowered wages. Whatever Labour politicians sometimes say that, and how fantastic it is to have the Labour politician responsible for issues of migration is Diane Abbott, who I have absolute 100% confidence in on all of these issues. It's fantastic for the first time in my lifetime to have that. But we must not give an inch to those people who argue that migrants cause low wages, because it's not true. And every time anybody argues that, we need to be campaigning against that and saying that they're wrong. So we need to be popularising the anti-racist case. We need to be popularising the argument that says migrants are welcome. I'm fighting for that every day, but also being very vigilant to campaign against fascism and watching it. And that's why this march needs to be enormous. And that's why we all need to be there. And that's why building this movement that we all talk about is so important. So I hope we are all there and we get loads more people and make it a fantastic day. Thank you.